greatness of your love. You are beautiful beyond description, majesty enthroned above. And I stand in awe of you. I stand in awe of you. Holy God, to whom all praise is due. I stand in awe of you.
You are beautiful beyond description, yet God crushed you for my sin. In agony and deep affliction, cut off that I might enter in. Who can grasp such tender compassion? Who can fathom this mercy so free? You are beautiful beyond description, Lamb of God who died for me.
And I stand in awe of you. I stand in awe of you. Holy God, to whom all praise is due. I stand in awe of you, in awe of you. I stand in awe of you. I stand in awe of you. Holy God, to whom all praise is due. I stand in awe of you. I stand in awe of you. I stand in awe of
Amen.
Thank you, son. Well, good morning, everyone. Shabbat shalom. And greetings, everyone that watching online. Welcome. I'm going to introduce Jon Schleifer up here in a moment, and he's going to talk to us today about, I'll just put it in, it might not be exactly, but the nutshell of it is it's about economics. I want to cue it up a little bit, and that's a word that I'm using intentionally because while we were in worship, I saw some of you old heads, I'm sure even the young heads know, but you know, back in the day you had a LP that you would drop a needle on, right? And I hear they're making a comeback, they're trying to. And that's what I saw within myself, just a needle being dropped on a record player, on a LP album. And what I heard the Lord say to me was that you would it's a new voice, and we know there's a lot of things that go with that. But when you're a DJ, I believe that's what I saw within myself way back in the day. A needle being dropped on a record player and so forth. So I have a familiarity with it. And a DJ. Now think of this correlation with heaven. This will be brief, but I feel I want to. But I heard the Lord say to me why we're heading in this direction or talking about it today. It's a new voice, and we know there's a lot of things that go with that about economics. When you're a DJ, I believe that's what I saw. One of the things heaven is wanting us to get some needle being dropped on a record player and so forth. And the reason I'm referring to a DJ is just that's what a DJ. Now think of this correlation with what I'm getting at with that. Was that I heard the Lord say a good DJ, especially if they're live with an audience. It's a new voice, and we know there's a lot of things that go with that about economics. You learn how to read an audience. I believe that's what I saw. One of the things moving them and what isn't, what they need to hear to take and the reason I'm referring to a DJ is just a DJ. Now think of this correlation with what I'm getting at with that was I heard DJ, a good DJ, especially if they're live. That's kind of where heaven is saying it's a new voice, and we know there's a lot of. I know there's many things about economics. You learn how to read an audience or economics. One of the what's moving them and what isn't, what they need to hear to take and the reason I'm referring to a DJ is just and DJ. Now think of this. How many of you had the opportunity to read that played out? Was I heard DJ, a good DJ, especially in that's kind of where heaven is saying it's a new voice, and he knows there's a lot of specific things about and you learn how to read an audience or economically. One of the what's moving them and what isn't, what they need to hear to take and the reason I'm referring to DJ and DJ. Now think of this. How many of you had the opportunity to read that played out? Was I heard DJ, a good DJ, especially in that's kind of where heaven is saying it's a new voice, and he knows there's a lot of specific things about and you learn how to read an audience or economically. One of the what's moving them and what isn't, what they need to hear to take and the reason I'm referring to DJ and DJ. Now think of this. How many of you had the opportunity to read that played out? Was I heard DJ, a good DJ, especially in that's kind of where heaven is saying it's a new voice, and he knows there's a lot of specific things about and you learn how to read an audience or economically. One of the what's moving them and what isn't, what they need to hear to take and the reason I'm referring to DJ and DJ. Now think of this. How many of you had the opportunity to read that played out? Was I heard DJ, a good DJ, especially in that's kind of where heaven is saying it's a new voice, and he knows there's a lot of specific things about and you learn how to read an audience or economically. One of the what's moving them and what isn't.
The reason being, the Lord wants to prosper his people, correct? But he also applies wisdom to it. And it may not be, quote, a churchy message that John's going to give, but even practical matters have a church message in it. And like I would refer to parable of penance and 5 wise virgins. So there's a lot of, the reason being, the Lord wants to prosper his church, but he also applies wisdom different. And it may not be, quote, a churchy message that John's going to give, but even practical matters. So he wants the church lesson here. You see this, and like I would refer to parable of penance. So you get this 5 wise virgins. And so I believe the reason he had wants to prosper his church, but he also applies wisdom different. And it may not be, quote, a churchy message that John's going to give, but even practical matters. So he wants the church lesson here. You see this, and like I would refer to parable of penance. 4th grade, and we get the Lord's 5 wise virgins. And so I believe the reason he he had the good times, but he also applies wisdom to it. And it's not church to be so it's just last year. And I came to John in the middle of the fourth grade. And I believe the reason he had these good times and one of the things that he also applies wisdom to it. And it's not church to be and I came to John in the middle of the fourth grade. And I realized that we made some these good times and one of the things that he also applies wisdom to it. And it's not church to
Stuff. They're in the old, leather-bound books. So it's what I do. All right. So anyway, I am not a economist. I'm not a politician. I'm just a dude that has an odd interest in economics. So here we go. Let her rip, potato chip. So if you remember anything about this morning, 3 things. Remember this: God is in control. Hang on. Be informed. That's it. It's going to be interesting times, let me tell you. God is in control. Hang on and be informed. So a lot of you know that I was in the Marine Corps for 30 years, and that shapes your mind, and you learn a lot of different things, go to a lot of schools. And one thing that is evident to me is that nation states have fights, and they have a clash of wills. And warfare is a clash of wills at a national level. And just like we may fight with each other, it's my will against yours, and that's why we get into arguments. That's a clash of wills. Well, warfare is a clash of wills at the nation-state level. But all of us, we can grasp onto the Marine, and that's military fighting. That's the might. but there's also diplomatic warfare, there's informational warfare, and there's economic warfare. And what we have been in and what we currently are in is in an economic war. And the Chinese Communist Party, they plan their history 50 years in advance. So if you ask them, they've been at war with us for 50 years. If you ask others, we've been in war on terror, since 9/11. But the bottom line is that we are in an economic war, and so we just need to figure out, well, who's the enemy? Who are we fighting at? Because we have that green marine military mentality, and it's easy to go, oh, Chairman Joint Chiefs, and then it all trickles down. Well, for an economic war, who's in charge? I mean, Janet Yellen? Are you kidding me? She's the the Secretary, who 2 months ago said there's no inflation, or if it is, it'll be transitory. That's who's leading the Treasury Department. The head of the Federal Reserve, which is a private corporation that handles our money process for it. He's going to be leading that war up the economic hill, So we need to figure out who's the enemy. Is it the Chinese Communist Party? Is it Russia? Is it global bankers? Or is it what one Spanish general said, is it the fifth column? Is it within us, right? So that's a very interesting comment. So is the war within us as individuals? Is the war within the nation of our republic? So Max, or who's ever running that, would you play video 1, please? This is a 3-minute video. Pastor referenced Steve Bannon. Steve was a Navy SEAL, and he's very well connected to political powers. He has his own blog, and we're going to watch a discussion between he and Peter Navarro. And Dr. Navarro was also heavily involved in the Trump administration, and a very successful businessman, and he's the one that really got the logistic tail associated with the vaccines and all that kind of stuff going in the right direction. And video 1 is what we'll be looking for.
You feel like you're working harder for your money just to get by?
Second video. There we go.
Dr. Navarro calling the top. He's got Dr. Navarro calling the top. He's got a chart. Dr. Navarro calling the top. He's got a chart to back it up. We're kind of pressed for time, Dr. Navarro. Another bloodbath, not just in stocks. We keep telling people in the bond market. Absolute bloodbath. And a term we want everybody to capitulation. Capitulation. Right? When the happy talk and the spin stops. Capitulation. Dr. Navarro, give us your wrap for today. This is going to be the first of many brutal days, sir.
Look, Steve, that clip was from 10 months ago. You and me on the War Room got this exactly right. And even today, the touts on CNBC are saying, well, it looks good. The market ended up a little bit. Here's the chart, Steve, okay? One chart, right? The top of that chart is when I made the call back in November. It's a downward trend all the way today. What did I say, Steve, yesterday? I said, look, we're going to hit 25,000 on the Dow now, long before we ever hit 40,000. And the idea, we haven't seen capitulation yet, Steve. We're going down to 25,000. And the reason is, and that November was a turning point. That was that one thing that Steve Bannon said could push us over the stagflationary edge. It did. And good Lord, CNBC, will you put some smart people other than Rick Santelli on that network? These people are idiots stealing people's money.
We'll play. Yeah. Here's what you got to watch for. I've got a bunch of stuff up on Getter right now about the changes in financial circumstance, about mortgages, about what you have to make. This chart that somebody did and got to me about the difference in income you have to make with a 30% down payment is really puts you on the precipice of a implosion of the housing bubble. I mean, everything in your life financially and economically is changing in the last 72 hours, and it's only going to get worse. Peter, in the bond market, you've been saying, hey, normally when you come out of the stocks, you can get into bonds, but there's no place to hide here, right? This is a bloodbath.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Everywhere.
Let me give you a second chart here, Steve. This is the short of the long bond, which illustrates that from the day I made that call on the stock market going down, the bond prices have been going down, because when that thing's heading straight up, bond prices are going down. And look, as I explained in November, the usual asset allocation strategy is like, half bonds, half stocks, because those prices move in opposite directions, so you have a natural hedge. When you have stagflation, they both go down at the same time. The only protection is very risky short selling. So this is a bloodbath. We are losing trillions and trillions of dollars of wealth. And Steve, the bond market is an ocean compared to the pond of the stock market. And it's all about the bond market.
It's an ocean. It's 20 to 1. The bond market is much more important in your life. A couple things. Just remember, as you're seeing this red, that's your pension funds. That's your 401ks. That's your pension funds. That's all these geniuses. Larry Finks are the geniuses managing your money. But also in the bond market, remember your asset allocation is probably 60-40 at best. I tell you what, Peter, hang on for a second. There's some news out of China I got to talk to you about, unconfirmed. But I want to bring in Boris. We got Ben Berquam down at the rally. We're going to go to him in a second. I want to bring in Boris. Boris, you've also worked on Wall Street for many years. Do I have Boris by phone? Boris, give us your assessment and tie together, because everybody in the audience knows this. This is what I had Russ vote on. They're on Capitol Hill right now, and the deal they're making, whether it's in 60 days as a short CR or a long CR that takes us in when we have control in January, because we're going to pick up at least 40 seats. Both of them are predicated on staying at 2021 numbers. That is basically $1.5 trillion base.
Happened. And so, remember ancient texts, right? Old books. How about this one? The book of Amos, Old Covenant, chapter 3, verse 7. Surely the Lord God does nothing unless he reveals his secret to his servants, the prophets. So, back to that video. Peter Navarro was talking about the Dow going down to 25,000. I believe it's going to go to 20,000, which is really, really ugly for the Schleifers. But, and the reason I say that is there was a prophet that said, Kim Clement, if some of you know that, and he said this years ago when the Dow was around 12,000. Right now, the other day it closed less than at 28,900, something up like that. It was up at 35,000, and now it's come down. Peter Navarro says he believes it's going to go to 25. I believe it's going to go to 20 because of what the prophet said. And so what Kim Clement said, a little bit of a different topic, but he was talking about a currency revaluation is what Prophet Kim Clement was saying. He said when it hits 20,000, it's going to reevaluate. And he was specifically referencing the Iraqi dinar. 20,000, we passed that years ago. I mean, maybe in the first or second year of the Trump administration, the first administration. And so when that didn't happen, I was like, prophets aren't wrong, man. You know, way up to 35, and now it's coming down like a brick, right? And so that's one thing. That's what the prophet said. So I'm kind of thinking it's going to get really ugly for stocks. So that's one thing to remember. Now, Anna and I, we follow a few prophets and have for some time, and we're able to kind of sniff out, right? You know, who's legit for us and who's not. And so the Canadian Hammer, Barry Wunsch, the Canadian Hammer on the Elijah Streams, episode 25, was on September 22nd, just a little over a week ago. And around the 23-minute mark, he said this: the cabal will fall. He said that twice. Then he said, the world as they know it has been changed. Past tense. Has been changed forever. What did he just say, Steve Bannon? In the last 72 hours, things have changed that'll affect your life. Okay, and so he goes on. The cabal will fall, the cabal will fall. The world as they knew it has been changed forever. I will shred their plans and their empires. Watch as I dismantle every evil demonic structure one by one. For they have had their day, and it is coming to an end. So do not be dismayed. Do not fear. Then another prophet that we follow is a gentleman named Hank Kuhneman. And he was on a show called Flashpoint. And on or about September 24th, at the 8-minute and 40-second mark, he said this: and what has happened to your Federal Reserve? Because I will raise up something new. I will raise up something greater. And God says, I will cause your economy. And there is a resilience. And God has placed and anointing on you. So something is happening, or has happened, or will happen, but something is up. So when is this shift going to happen? What is going to happen? And I believe that not only now, I believe it already has happened. I believe the global economic system, as we currently understand it, will radically, radically change. Some say collapse, some say reset. My portfolio says ouch, but I simply say hang on. Because history has shown from reading my old books, right? These are books from the 1800s, that any time without a central bank, there is turmoil that lasts a period of a few years. Let's see, it's from many months to a few years between booms and busts. So if you believe we're booming, I believe we're busting. So in warfare, this is military warfare now, the enemy may not realize all the planning, all the practice, all the exercise that goes into a single battle. It has been planned, played out, exercised on multiple times prior to execution. So that's prior to the enemy feeling pain, okay? Now, warfare is planned decades in advance. And I can assure you, every single place in the world, in the Pentagon, there's a big old fat book with dust on it, covered in dust, that's reviewed every 10 years. And if we decide that we're going to attack Antarctica, they're going to pull out the Antarctica O plan. They dust it off, and they read it, and they go with what's been planned decades in advance. And so with that as a understanding, in the Marine Corps, we had a prophet, and we called him the Prophet of the Pacific. And his name is very not well known, even in Marine Corps circles. You have to be affiliated with logistics to understand the Prophet of the Pacific. His name was Major Pete Ellis. Pete was an intelligence officer, and he was the author of O-Plan, Operational Plan, O-Plan 712. And the title of that was Advanced Base Operations in Micronesia. And so his plans were instrumental for the amphibious beach assaults and landings that defeated the Japanese in World War II. So who would like to venture a guess when O-Plan 712 was authored? No takers? Okay, so figure it out. World War II, 1939 to September 2nd, 1945. And Major Pete Ellis developed those plans in 1920, 20 years before they were executed. So we've been in a war, and the rest of the global economies are nearing an end or a new beginning, depending on how you want to look at it, right? Because everything keeps churning. Nobody's going to lose their life. Things are just going to change. So says the news. So says the prophets, the news on the TV I just showed you. I've got a host of articles that I won't get into. I'll just reference them. But the prophets clearly are saying that, from Kim Clement from probably a decade ago to here just within the last 2 weeks. The prophets are speaking. And so I believe it is for now. And when is this going to happen? So several months ago, I got up here and I talked about a great man, Dr. Bill Hammond, and I talked about his book, and in his book, it was titled Prophetic Terminology. You remember this one? So Dr. Hammond's been around the prophetic for decades, and based on his understanding and coupled with his biblical examples, he found the following timetables for prophetic words to be helpful but not rigid, and I'll go over these real quick. So when a prophet says immediately, according to Dr. Hammond, it means from 1 day to 3 years. If a prophet says very soon, it means 1 to 10 years. According to Dr. Hammond and his years and years of experience, if a prophet says now or this day, it means 1 to 40 years. If a prophet says, I will, without a definite time designation, It means God will act sometime in the person's life if that person is obedient. If a prophet says soon, that's the term that Jesus used when he described the time of his soon return almost 2,000 years ago. So when is this going to happen? I believe it's already happened. I thought personally, I thought it was going to happen in May of 2022. Some interesting things happened surrounding that. A lot of the prophets were talking about. There was blood moons lining up and all these different things. And I was like, it's happening in May. And I was saying that in November of 2021. If it doesn't happen before May, Schleif doesn't know anything. Well, guess what? I don't know anything. Clearly, I was off. So I based this off of the cadence in the media. I based it off of what the prophets have said years ago, Kim Clement, as well as within this last week, I'm more firmly convinced that it has happened. And I based that off of, my own research, my own pocketbook, and the things that I have studied. I believe we are weeks to a few months away from seeing, from feeling, and experiencing something significant. So, as Steve Bannon said, and this was last weekend, he said, within the last 72 hours, it's already happened, your life will change forever. And so, we just don't feel it yet. We haven't seen it. I mean, we don't run in his circles. And we haven't, we go to Wawa and we can get cash out of the machine. Nothing's changed, right? I mean, prices, inflation's going up. I'm feeling that, electricity bill, gas bill, food bill, everything else. But really, you think about it, people in Florida are devastated. Christians around the world are being persecuted. And we're, worried about inflation. I'm worried about my portfolio. When can I retire, this and that? We're blessed people. And regardless of what happens, you're going to continue to live. And you're going to continue to be able to, see your loved ones and everything else. Life and my odd months away from seeing, feeling, and experiencing something significant. And I do believe that the central bankers know that their system is presently collapsing with no hope for a soft landing. So what I'd like to do is I want to hand out some slides here. And some of you may have to share. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so there's only, if there's like one per row, okay? So Ray Dalio is a billionaire. And Ray Dalio is the author of these 3 graphs that I've printed out for you. He has the most successful and largest hedge fund in the world, and he made his money really off of the rise of China. And he's been in business since the mid to late 80s. And what I want to highlight here is empires, the rise and fall of empires. And what Ray did in not his most recent book, but his previous one, is he studied the rise and fall of empires over the last 500 years. And he based these rising and falling based on these 6 variables. Down in the bottom right on your first sheet, it says, nations' powers are built upon technical and educational competencies, their economic output, their trade, ability to trade, the might of their military, whether their financial status, and then the big one is the reserve status. And so to have a global reserve currency, to be known as the global reserve currency is a big deal. That's how nation states interact with business. And so the way it's been for the United States since 1971, when President Nixon, 1973, when President Nixon temporarily closed the gold window, we went to what's called, people believe, a petrodollar. And any transaction anywhere in the world, any country, even our enemies that wanted to buy oil from Saudi Arabia, they had to change their bagooters into US dollars to buy oil from them, even if they hated us. That's what a reserve currency does. And so if you look over the last 500 years, there's been many rises and falls in empires, but I'm just focusing on these four in the front. So clearly, Dutch, you know, who are they? You know, Great Britain, you know, Queen just died, no big deal. And then you're like, rah, rah, United States, we're Americans, we love it, you know. But if you look at where are we going on our education, look at that blue line. Holy smokes, that thing's in the tank. You know, since the 1900s, we've been on a steady decline as far as the educated population. And you could say, no, I mean, and my grandpappy didn't read and write, now he does. Well, it's taking graduation rates, college, PhDs, and all that kind of stuff. That's what that is. And then the other one is the reserve status of the currency. That's a brown line, and that's kind of difficult to see, but it starts as a hockey stick, 1850, 1900 down at the bottom, and then it shoots up. That's the currency one. Now look at China. Everything in China is moving up, and that's of significance. And remember earlier I said China's in a 50-year war with us. They plan their culture in 50 years, and they're at war with us, and they are gaining rapidly. So the second page I want to highlight there is, of the things that Ray Dalio studied, these are the nations rising and falling. And you'll notice that the majority of nations, when they switch to that ruling status, there's a war that resets everything. And I don't know if you've noticed in the news lately, and even this morning, what's his name, Gates, the computer guy, said that there is going to be a hung election and there will be a civil war. He said that this morning. And so this GDP, gross domestic product, between us and China, we've been on a steady rise. But in 2020, something happened, and who was the global manufacturer of anything that was healthcare related? China. So you can see that this red dashed line, it's probably going pretty vertical. Similarly, look at the global exports down in the bottom there. China, you can imagine that that thing is probably going vertical since 2020. Similarly, global share of output. So interesting stuff. So enough on those slides. So let's learn about banking history. So don't worry, I will wake you up when I'm done with this banking history portion, okay? So regarding central banks or global bankers, let's talk about the birth of the third Federal Reserve that was birthed in 1913, and that's what we currently understand as the Federal Reserve. Now, all this information I'm about to tell you, this comes from my old books, okay? And probably my most modern book on this is from 1985. That's where they created the Federal Reserve, is at Jekyll Island. And then also comes from Secrets of the Temple. So that's also about the Federal Reserve. So anyway, the United States struggled for years over whether to have a central bank. So Alexander Hamilton, the first Secretary of Treasury, convinced Congress to create the first bank of the United States in 1791 to handle the infant republic's monetary affairs over the objections of then Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson, who feared the concentration of so much economic power in one place. Hostility to the bank persisted, and in 1811, Congress let its charter lapse. So the first central bank in the United States lasted 20 years because in 1791, they said, let's try this experiment for 20 years. So they did, and they stopped it. The second Bank of the United States began life in 1816, but Andrew Jackson, a populist, opposed the power of money interests and vetoed the renewal of the charter, which expired in 1836. Again, a 20-year lifespan legislatively, 1816 to 1836. So without a central bank, private and state-owned banks could issue their own currencies, convertible in theory on demand to gold. In practice, one bank's dollars might be worth more than another bank's dollars if investors had more faith in one bank's stability over another bank's stability. And banks seldom kept enough gold to redeem the currency they issued. They would borrow from other banks if they were in a pinch, and they were usually bigger banks in order to handle contingencies or small runs, that type of thing. But many banks faced the same demand at once. There wouldn't be enough gold to go around, and as a result, many banks failed. Customers fearing others would follow would then rush to convert their notes to gold, triggering more failures. Such panics were commonplace. And a note back then was a bank would have physical gold in their vault, and they would issue paper against that gold. And so what they would do is they would issue more paper on the gold than they had gold to cover it. So when people came in to redeem their paper, there wasn't the gold there. That's what happened back then. So notice the time between the first central bank of the United States and the central. It was 5 years between the conclusion of the first central bank to the inception of the second central bank. Economies in the states were not perfect during the time of the central banks. However, note that panics were commonplace. The second central bank ended in 1836, and the third central bank, what we now know as a Federal Reserve, was created in 1913. So for 77 years, the time between the second and the third, our current Federal Reserve, panics were commonplace. The event that finally led to the Fed's creation was the panic in 1907, which began with a run on several banks that had lost money when customers speculated on the stock market. Kind of sounds like 2008 to me. So John Pierpont Morgan, J.P. Morgan, the head of the bank that bore his name, convened New York's leading bankers in his personal library and persuaded them to meet all the demands for cash then besieging the city's troubled banks. To prevent a repeat, Congress, at the prodding of banks, passed the Federal Reserve Act in 1913. And that comes from my little book of economics, How the Economy Works. That was printed in 2010. So the Federal Reserve was not born in isolation. Its creation was the keystone in a profound alteration that occurred in the American culture of self-government. So new sensibility that devalued the potential of representative democracy, and it imposed limitations on it. So what that means is we have a representative government. And at the time, we had a treasury, and the treasury would do all the banking. But those decisions were too difficult for them to make, so they created bureaucrats, right? And they created the Federal Reserve so that they could deflect blame. And so that's what they did, is they created these professionals to manage the money. Let's see. So here's, so decisions on great public issues that were once left to politics are now consigned to disinterested experts, bureaucratic technicians who have specialized training. Good government, they believed at the time in 1913, must be managed, okay? So it's not representative government anymore, it's bureaucrats managing our elected officials over economics. So the managers must occasionally ignore public opinion in order to make correct decisions. So you can wake up now, okay? Everybody awake? That's the banking history portion. So what? What does that have to do with us? What is happening? So for thousands of years, there's been three types of monetary systems. Type 1 is hard money. That's coins, metal, gold, silver, copper. And then there's type 2, that's paper money. I referenced that earlier, where a bank would issue paper on the gold that they had in their vault. That's paper money. And type 3 is what we know as fiat money. It's not based on anything, just on the good faith that you believe that it has value. That's fiat. So hard money is the most restrictive system. And Max, I'm getting ready to play the second video. Hard money is the most restrictive system because money can't be created unless the supply of that metal is mined or is increased, right? And money and credit are more easily created in the second type of system, where they have metal, money in the bank, but they issue paper. You can create more money, more credit in that second type. So they're rationing their claims on the hard money, on the actual money, that gold that's held. And that reduces the run on banks, essentially. It creates it, but it reduces it. So the results when you get into this are defaults when a bank closes its doors, or if depositors lose their hard assets. There's devaluations on the money, and it's difficult for the country to create new money, okay, if they run out of that hard asset. So what I want to do now is let's play video number 2. And what happens in all of these scenarios.
Do you feel like you're working harder? Do you feel like you're working harder for your money just to get by? It's not just you. Millions of families around the world are feeling the exact same thing. In fact, as of 2017, 44% of Americans said they couldn't cover a $400 emergency expense if it popped up. So what's happening? Take a look at some of the major staples in our lives today and how much more they have increased in cost from the year 2000 to 2018. Water and sewage up 133%, car insurance up 97%, and the list goes on. This isn't even counting the 2021 inflation numbers that are the highest since 1982. We're all feeling it, but why is it happening? It's not that things are necessarily costing more to make our service, it's that the fiat currency used to buy the goods is becoming worth less. As you can see, when the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, a dollar was worth, well, a dollar. Because of some government decisions such as going off of the gold standard and increased money printing, the purchasing power over time was dropped to less than 5 cents on the dollar compared to 1913. Now, this isn't anything new, unfortunately. There's a long list of countries where this exact same thing has happened, including Germany, Argentina, Zimbabwe, and most recently Venezuela. In each case, they have attempted to print themselves out of their version of a financial crisis. The playbook is being passed around the world, and the result is always the same. If you look at the M1 currency supply chart, it will give you a good indication of what result we could be headed for in the United States. The M1 currency supply is just a way of showing how much printed money is in the hands of the citizens in a country. It is a direct link to the printing of fiat currency. As you can see, the US made a drastic decision related to the COVID-19 pandemic in the year 2020 and decided to go on an even more massive printing spree. As we have seen throughout history, more printing leads to more inflation, which means it takes more fiat currency to purchase the things that we need to live. So how are we supposed to protect ourselves from what seems to be a runaway train?
Like institutional currencies, CDs, those types of things, and M3, I believe, if I'm recalling from like 2 decades ago, it's institutional bonds that are, 40 plus years. That's what they were referencing was M1 is our nation just started printing. They call it quantitative easing is what they called it. But that was just print, 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 print. So what's interesting, right? So we're in an economic war, right? So in 2020, the virus came. So where did the virus come from? China, okay? And can you, based on what you just saw, could you see that perhaps it's in the realm of the possible that China did this to destroy us economically? Because you just saw that Venezuela, all these other countries are into hyperinflation because they had so much fiat currency, M1, on the street. And so that is how economic warfare behaves. Let me put it that way. So who stands to benefit if our economy is significantly impacted? China. And you remember from those Ray Dalio charts, China is on the rise in every single indicator, but when you look at those things that Ray Dalio studied over the last 500 years of empires falling and empires rising, the United States is declining. So we're clearly in an economic war, and the enemy wants us to feel pain or be destroyed. Just like in real warfare, we plan years in advance. We exercise, practice, before the enemy ever sees it coming, ever feels the pain. And that's what we're experiencing, and what we have experienced, we're now, the decisions that have been made, we're now going to be seeing it. On that one chart where it said 1913 and then it started that precipitous fall, so in 1944, that was Brenton Woods, the creature from Jekyll Island. That's when that happened, okay? The nations of the world agreed to use the dollar as the global reserve currency there at Bretton Woods because they viewed it as good as gold. That's how they came up with that saying. Then in '73, President Nixon temporarily closed the gold window. This action canceled anyone or any entity from cashing in their dollars for gold. So we've been on a total fiat currency since that time, 1973. Some would say since then we've been off the gold standard, we've been on the petrodollar, which is true, and I already explained that to you, that we worked a deal out with Saudi Arabia. 1991, why was Schleifer in the Middle East? Because of oil. In 2003, why was Schleifer in the Middle East? Because of oil. 1903, Brigadier General Smedley Butler, United States Marine Corps General, had this to say after his retirement: war is a racket. And he went on to do a diatribe how he had fought in the Central America. We called them the banana wars, is what Marines called them. He fought in the banana wars over oil. This is a general in the Marine Corps in the late 1800s and early 1900s describing his belief of why he laid it all on the line. And so isn't that interesting? Let's see. Oh, so what I wanted to point out there is in November of 2021, you probably didn't hear about this, but our dear competitor, Vladimir Putin, went to Saudi Arabia. And what did they talk about? They talked about, we the Saudis will protect you from your enemies, Iran. Does everybody understand that China has a gold-backed yuan? Interesting, isn't it? And so as we've been putting embargoes and everything else, tariffs against Russia, China comes in and says, Vladimir, I'll buy whatever it is you need and I'll give it to you. So all those transactions are being done in gold-backed currencies. And you remember Ray Dalio's chart, the rising empire? They want to be that reserve currency status. They're on the rise. So just isn't that interesting? So the perception of good as gold is shattering. And I'm almost done here, and then Pastor Karen's going to get up and give some announcements, and then we'll be done. So remember what I said with fiat currencies, it's based on good faith. You believe in this thing, this paper, that it's going to get you what you want. And so in America, it's kind of easy because everybody uses that dollar, but that's changing around the world. So here's another thing that, it makes you stop and go, So where was Xi Jinping on September 22nd? He was a speaker at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They've been around for 22 years, and so these Asian countries did a group huddle. What do you think they talked about? That they are not going to buy and transact in US dollars anymore. Isn't that interesting? They're talking about their own regional currency. So they don't believe our dollar has our fiat is good as gold anymore. They don't believe that. So now they're going in their own direction. I had some other slides that I was going to show you, but just due to time, I didn't print them out. But our Federal Reserve has 12 centers, and one is in Philly, there's one in Atlanta, San Francisco. And so the Fed chair of the Atlanta Fed referenced challenges with world liquidity. And what liquidity means is, you remember back in the example where I was given, you were all asleep, so I have to revise it again. So while you were sleeping, it's a good movie, while you were sleeping, I talked about bank runs and how people would go and redeem their coupons for gold. They'd do it all at the same time, and there was a run on the bank. Well, what would happen, and what still happens today, is if there's a run, the banks go to another bank to borrow. That's called liquidity. That they can go someplace, they know that they got this money, that's liquidity. And so what the Atlanta president of the Federal Reserve, Bostic is his name, he just said last week, he's concerned on global liquidity. So if you can see that Saudi Arabia is not transacting in US dollars anymore, if you can see that Saudi Arabia is funneling all their oil, or a large portion of it, to China gold-backed currency, to Russia gold-backed currency, and when you have Xi Jinping at the 22nd SOC 2 weeks ago saying, hey, let's do our own thing, something's up, right? And so the United States as a nation is going to feel the pain because of what the Federal Reserve has done. So I could show a whole bunch of other news articles. I saved news articles in a particular file, and I was going through them. And I've been saving these things since 2016. And it was fascinating about how back then nations were talking about going to gold-backed currencies. It was also interesting to talk about how they were talking about liquidity crisis of the future. So historically, we are in a time of bust from our last boom. So with history as an indicator, this will be a period of many months to a few years of economic turmoil, of pain that you may feel. So I'm not a financial planner, nor am I offering you investment advice. I would heed what the prophets have said. So I will add that God is in control. I will say hang in, hang on, be informed, because this is going to get really, really interesting. We are going to experience something that has not occurred in any living person's life. That's what we're going to be facing. That's what we're going to feel the pain of. So consider this as a parting shot. I don't know where you guys get your money. I go to Wawa. So imagine you go into Wawa and the machine is out of money, or it doesn't work because Wawa decided it's not in their financial interest to be in the banking business anymore. So you can't go to Wawa anymore. Don't get in front of Schleif when you're taking my sugary goodness and caffeine away from me, right? I gotta have that. I gotta go to Wawa. So as a practical matter, have some cash in the house so that if we had a power outage or a blackout for a period of 3 to 10 days, know that you can survive cash-wise, you know? Schleif can afford his sugary goodness and caffeine, right? So have some cash, have your vehicles gassed up, right? So that way, if there's power outages and turmoil, you don't have to worry about the gas station electric pumps not being able to take your credit card, right? So those are some practical things, and I hope that everybody has sufficient toilet paper. In closing, the longest used currency in the United States, in the Northern Hemisphere, guesses what it was. You're absolutely right, Chasen. Tobacco leaves. Tobacco leaves were the longest reigning currency on this continent. I was wondering whether it was toilet paper in 2020 because it was like gold, man. So that's really all I have for you. I'm very grateful for your attention, and let's just see why God put it on your heart to have me speak about economics. And yeah, I'll take any questions. And I spoke a lot to you last weekend, and there may have been some things that I didn't cover out of trying to get through this. So is there any questions that anybody has? Jason?
Hello? Okay. How does that, so from all that you were discussing, how do you relate that to the prophetic word about the dinar?
So, the dinar is a non-tradable currency right now. If you want to cash in your dinar, you have to go to Iraq to do that. It's not traded on the markets. Based on what the prophets have said, I believe the dinar will reevaluate to some level. Now, when it crashed, it was at the first Gulf War, and it was at $3 to 1 US dollar. So if you bought it for a nickel, you're going to make a bunch of money if it goes back to that reset level. So I believe that, based on what the prophet said, that the dinar will reevaluate to what level, I don't know. And to when that happens, I don't know. What I do know, the way currencies are traded between the sovereigns, nation states, they're in baskets, big bundles, and they're not individuals, right? So I hope that when this all happens, that it allows people to exchange, individual people to exchange individual dollars. And the reason I say that is the way currencies used to be traded, and by used to I mean 15-ish years ago, that it was only investment banks and nation states, sovereigns, that could trade currencies. You had, well, that's not true. They had to be in like hundreds of thousands of dollars bundles, right? Since that time, they've broken it up where individuals can trade currencies. But it used to be that institutions and only sovereigns could do it. So I say all that to say, the prophets have said, and I believe the prophet, that the Iraqi dinar will reevaluate sometime, and I would believe that it would be after this massive shift where we all feel the pain. So you could fly to Iraq and exchange it at that time for a higher value. Now, whether you could do that at a U.S. bank or something like that, that's not to be determined yet. Any other questions? Rennie?
And see?
I do not.
You do not? Okay. So so we are expected to be changing over to the silver and gold currency here in.
So that's a great question, and the answer to that is I believe yes. Now, the debate is whether it will be asset-backed digital currency or just digital currency. So if you believe Joe Biden, he said less than a month ago that in May of 2023, the U.S. will be on a digital dollar, okay? So based on what I just said 10 minutes ago, where other nations are not believing our dollar is good as gold, at least there's a piece of paper. Now, can you imagine the good faith that people are going to believe in a digital dollar, according to what Joe Biden said? There won't be any value to it, okay? So it's not even a struggle. There's others that are pursuing asset-backed digital currencies, gold-backed, silver-backed digital dollars. And that's where we're going. Now, so I can talk a lot, so I'm going to stop right there. Have I answered your question?
And then, well, of course, we don't want the way Biden, because that's just tracing us everywhere we go. But if it's on a gold and silver, they can't trace us. we have our privacy.
So yes and no, okay? So based on history, the vast majority of transactions will be digital. And I believe they'll be asset-backed digital, okay? But based on history, you're always going to have something in your pocket, in your wallet. Now, there's a lot of people that would dispute that, but that's what I believe based on reading my old books and reading history. You're always going to have cash. Now, think of it, though, that you could say, now, Schleifer, you're wrong, because I do everything on my credit card and I pay it off at the end of the month anyway. So if you have cash, they can't track you. I do a lot of cash. I've been that way for a long time because I don't want people knowing my business, right? So I do a lot in cash transactions. Now, you may think that because you're using your credit card, nobody knows what you're doing. And that's your aversion to what you call the rainbow currency, is people can see what you're doing. They can already see what you're doing with your credit card purchases.
Right.
I will segue briefly down a rabbit hole before I take your question. And what that rabbit hole relates to is a social credit score. And so during the pandemic, Australia and China exercised a future possible currency methodology which would be able to see what you did. And so I don't know about you, but my paychecks come digitally, right? And when I want to pay a bill, I transfer that digitally. So that's an example of a digital currency. But the way a social credit score would work is if you're the banker's daughter, he may slide you a few extra ones and zeros in the coding so that your bank account would be bigger even though you didn't do any additional work. And so what China and Australia tested during COVID was this social credit score and the trackability of a person's transactions based on their good behavior. How we felt that in the United States is that guy up there, Steve Bannon, he was deplatformed so that he was transacting in PayPal and some other methodologies of electronic payments, and they cut him off because of his political venting. And so that's the negative consequence of having a social credit score, and to your point about people being able to see your transactions if it's an electronic currency. Did I address that good enough?
But the digital money is eventually going to be like the mark of the beast, if everything's going to be digital.
So earlier when I first started, I said, who's the enemy? Is it the CCP? Is it Russia? Is it the bankers? Or is it the fifth column? Okay? And it's a good read. You can Google the fifth column. It's a Spanish general. He was marching on the city in 4 different columns. And they said, General, what are you going to do if this doesn't work? And he goes, it's in the bag. The fifth column will seize the victory for us. And what that meant was that there were people in the city that were sympathetic to the enemy, and so they capitulated. And what that means is you change over completely. That's capitulation. And they won the victory, the fifth column, from within, okay? So now let's back up to the revolutionary days, right? We were an infant republic. We were struggling. Guess who the majority of the population was here? They were British, right? After the war, do you think they shipped all the British soldiers back? No, they stayed here. A lot of them did. They had the option, okay? So that's an example, the revolutionary one, of the fifth column. And that's why we had such a struggle, even in the Civil War, is because we had that fifth column within. The enemy was within. Now let's back up, make it more personal, okay? So what will get you through difficult times is having a personal relationship with the living God. If your focus is on your portfolio, if your focus is on, getting by or getting your kid through school or making sure you got enough to eat or whatever, if that's your focus, you're going to have a hard time, right? And so Every single boom and bust in the 1800s, every single one was because of greed. The bankers wanted more, so they issued more paper. They knew they didn't have enough gold to cover it, but they kept issuing paper. They were greedy, right? And so that's only can be cured from the heart of the Father. And so that's another example of the enemies within us. So I forgot how I got down that rabbit trail, but I'm going to pull myself back out, and I'm going to take your questions here.
Your answer actually brought up two. The first one would be to the fifth column you mentioned. And that question would be, would you also say, possibly, from the liberal point of view, the fifth column is one of the reasons why there's an open border?
Yes.
Okay. And you can elaborate that in a second. With my second question, different track, with the understanding that we're at war with China, and I've heard recently, and I don't know the details, that their real estates around the world are having trouble. I don't know if you're aware of all that.
Yes.
Okay. Could you answer, if you know, why they are and how does that affect us?
Sure. So, China has the largest population, and they have a spiritual component to their real estate. They believe that spirits dwell within the structure. It is of benefit to single men to hold real estate as a sign of wealth to their potential suitors. And so they believe that the spirit resides within the structure, so they want everything brand new. They don't want to inherit somebody's, spirit, basically. And so that's been one of the reasons that there's been such a huge boom in Chinese real estate. Their largest real estate developer, Evergrande, has gone bankrupt, and this is probably 6 or so months ago. And what they were doing, there again, enemy within, the heart of the person, what have you, is they started taking people's money, and the consumer and the developer at fault here, right? So the consumer would take out a mortgage on a property that did not exist yet, believing in good faith that Evergrande was going to build this new high-rise building for them. So Evergrande took that money and they did other things. They got out of the real estate sector that they didn't have any knowledge in. They lost a lot of money. And then when they collapsed economically, and the reason they collapsed is bad policy by the CCP. They put in limits that real estate companies cannot have a debt-to-income ratio of such and such. So none of the developers could meet that requirement because they had already been corrupt in all these other things. So they collapsed due to bad policy. Now these people, that they invest their nest egg in real estate because of the spiritual component and because of the fact that they want to be good suitors for a female, and they want to have something to pass on to their children that has good spirit in it, they don't have anything. They've got a mortgage. They've been making payments for years, and they're never going to occupy it, right? They were just doing this for spiritual reasons. So did I answer your question on Chinese real estate? Another component is China and a lot of larger investors, and I'm not going to hammer on BlackRock because everybody says BlackRock is buying up everything. They did increase their real estate portfolio, but not where I'd say they're buying up everything. But if you wonder why real estate is booming, it's because all of the wealthy people, they know that they're getting ready for a crash, right? They know that their dollar is losing value, that you saw in the video. So where are they putting their money? It's not in the dollar, right? It has no value. They're putting it in tangible assets, artwork, exotic cars, collectibles, real estate. That's what's caused our real estate boom, has been that. They're putting it into assets, but it's also been cheap money due to the quantitative easing. Remember the big old hockey puck? They're creating all sorts of M1. We're like going, man, interest rates are cheap. I'm going to buy a house that I can't afford, right? And so what are the rich folk doing? They're buying up the real estate. They're getting out of the dollar, and they're putting it in tangible assets. So that's another reason. Did I answer your question? Okay. It's blue, the blue mic, Max.
So, if I followed you correctly, the primary reason why China is buying up real estate around the world, but even significantly here in the U.S., is spiritual.
Yes, and they also know that their economy is collapsing, so they're putting it into tangible assets as well.
Okay.
So there is a spiritual component, but then these folks aren't stupid. The business people, they're going, I'm going to get a place in Beverly Hills or what have you. So that's another reason.
And I'm sorry, maybe I missed it in what you were saying. With their collapse that's happening, how does that affect us as U.S. citizens and our economy and so forth?
So short answer is I don't specifically know, but I would believe that where we may feel the pain is they're the #1 global exporter of pretty much everything. So we may not be able to have Q-tips anymore, you know, something to that effect if that rich dude owned the Q-tip factory, so to speak. So it's probably, there's probably a really, really good answer, but based on the little that I know, based on my May 2022 prediction, that's my answer. Anything else? Alan?
Just so you know, John's going to be available after service too. So if the questions can wait till after service, but if you think it's something that we need to project on the internet, that feel free to ask.
I have two questions, and I will preface them with, first, thank you very much for the statement about focusing on the relationship with the living God, because that brings some peace and comfort.
Yeah.
And I understand you're not a financial planner, and some of this is speculating. So if things continue and really hit the bottom and go south and all that, then do you foresee what would happen with the paper money that we have now? Is there an exchange? Is there something that replaces it?
Yes. Based on the circles that I run in, keep in mind Joe Biden is saying there's going to be a digital dollar in May of 23. Also know that there already is a digital asset-backed currency as well. So those are two things to remember. So to your question, what happens to my fiat dollar? What I'm told is that it'll be exchanged dollar for an asset-backed dollar.
All right, and the second part?
If it's cash. So let me say that. So if you have our portfolio, so thank God I don't rely on a portfolio, right? God's in control. Anna and John have been in two tight spots in our life before. We were believers. You know, thank the Lord we never had creditors knocking on our door. But I mean, we were down to $98 at the beginning of a month. No job, no savings anymore because but I say all that to say, God is your provider. God is your provider, not your job, not your employer, not the dollars in your pocket. Were you going to ask a question, or did I forget your question?
No, I was going to ask another.
Please do.
Okay. So now, speculating, if you had cash now, what do you think you would do with your cash now, or some of it,
Yeah,
for
so
the
great
future?
question. So let me back up to where I went off on that diatribe, is that if you have cash, what I'm told is you'll get an asset-backed dollar for dollar, okay, fiat to asset-backed dollar, if it's cash. Now, where I was whining about my portfolio, that's not cash. That's stock. So if everything you got is in stocks, sorry, pal, you're not going to get a dollar for stocks, There has to be a bottom, right? And so understand that there's been trading and bartering ever since, man discovered fire, okay? So when people say that the S&P and Chicago Exchange, everything's going to collapse. It will, but understand that the sun's going to rise tomorrow, okay? And it may be pretty darn cheap, your portfolio, and you haven't lost money unless you sell. But to the point, what I'm told is you'll get an asset-backed dollar for a fiat dollar as long as it's cash. But for Schleif in our portfolio, out of luck. So your portfolio, out of luck. So your question was, if I had cash, what would I do with cash? So the Bible says you should invest in 8 different areas, okay? And so you should invest in 8 different areas, whether that's stocks, bonds, tangible assets, real estate, whether that's collectibles, whether that's gold, whether that's silver, whether it's your education. We're different. Anna and I are different because my retirement is based on the government, you know? And so keep in mind, this is a faith walk for Schleif, right? I mean, I used to say jokingly, you know, man, I'm going to be set when I'm 60. And then I would add this, as long as the government can hold together. I would say that 20 years ago, okay? Because my retirement is based on Marine Corps retirement. I'm also employed with the Federal Aviation Administration. And then I have what's called a thrift savings plan. It's like a 50, that's like a, what do you guys have? Like a 401k. It's like a 401k. And then also when I get to a certain age, I can pull out Social Security. So you can see, I'm a government dude, man, you know? So if the government holds together, I'll be fine because I've got that Marine Corps pension, I've got the FAA pension, I've got the thrift savings plan, I've got Social Security, so we're good, okay? So I don't have any individual stocks or anything else, but I would say, do what the Bible says, man. Have it in 8 different areas, okay? And be prepared to make money on both ends. And here's a sea story that relates to the Washington Treaty of 1871, okay? And so President Grant, the greatest achievement, according to my old books, the greatest achievement of President Grant is he got the treaty signed. And what the treaty entailed is we were in heavy debt after the Revolutionary War. And then we did John Jay's Act in 1872, and that settled, restructured the Revolutionary War debt. Then after the Civil War, we were in debt from the Civil War as well as the Revolutionary War, what John Jay orchestrated in 1872. Now we're at Grant. And for years, we'd been struggling. How are we going to pay for the war debt? Now, here's the story. To prepare your portfolio to make money on both ends, stocks, bonds, whatever, you're going to lose money in part of your portfolio, but be prepared that the other part makes up for that. And here's the sea story. So, North-South, Civil War, right? 1874-75, Lincoln realizes he's running a bankrupt war. So what does he do? He prints money, fiat. And they called those greenbacks back then. They called them greenbacks. And so the Great Britain, not only are they making money off of the North, they're making money off of the South. And so what they're doing in the South is Great Britain built warships in the islands, warships, and would attack the northern navies and armies as they try to go to the South, okay? And then they were investing in the North's debt, okay? So now fast forward, the war is over and everything else. Grant is saying, I'm now large and in charge. And it took a period of years to negotiate around the globe, because Spain was involved with this war, et cetera, the Washington Treaty of 1871. And what he did then is he settled all of the debt. And Great Britain was ecstatic because they knew that the fiat was worth nothing. So they bought as much greenback as they possibly could. And part of the deal in the 1871 Washington Treaty was you got to buy our greenbacks that are worthless, but you got to buy them at pre-war, at this level when you first printed them. And so that's an example at a nation state where they made both money on both ends of the transaction. They were making money on the North, they were making money on the South. And so anyway, what should you do? Make sure your portfolio is balanced. Obviously the market is tanking big time. And if I had, a collectible car, 70s, kind of car, it's going up in value. If I had tangible gold, it's going to rocket. If I had tangible silver, it's going to skyrocket. But you shouldn't put all your eggs in one basket. And the scripture says, divvy your portfolio up in 8 different ways. That's how I would advise you on that. Rennie? It's 12:15 for anybody if you can't see the clock.
People that bought some silver and gold, and they don't have it tangibly in their hands, and they got, like you were talking about, a certificate.
Mm-hmm.
And then if they go cash it out, you were saying there might not be because.
So that example was from when we were on the gold standard. That's what that example related to.
So would that happen again if people have like a certificate instead of that tangible right there in their hands?
So the reason I would say yes is this. The heart of man is corrupt, and it always has been, without a redeemer.
Mm-hmm.
Is
So
the
it's-
enemy within, right? So man is going to find a way to be corrupt. That's what they do. That's why they're sinners, and we need to be saved by grace. But to your point, when we get to another asset-backed currency, and I believe we're there, we just haven't felt it yet, there is the potential for people to be unscrupulous, but the way that it will likely be is that it'll be tracked, right? So they're going to know how much asset there is in gold. And here's something that's going to totally blow your mind, all right? And if anybody wants to leave, believe me, no offense, it's 12:15 and you're hungry, you got to go. Washington Treaty of 1871. He settled war debt, right? So who lost the most economically in the war was plantation owners. And in my boring books that I read, right, slaves back then, I think it was $16,000 back then per slave. 16 grand. So, South collapses, right? They're all up in arms, right? Humans were an asset, right? Not gold, humans, okay? Now fast forward, 1871 treaty. I haven't found it in print, but many people that I trust that know a lot more than I do say that in that treaty in 1871, that our nation's economy going forward was based on all assets, right? Our gold, our silver, our humans, our natural gas, and all those things. And so the currency of the future, yes, it can be diminished and people can be corrupt in how they do it. If it's tied to a tangible brick in a thing, guaranteed, man's going to somehow figure out how to be corrupt and make more money off of that brick of gold than that. So it's a big topic, and I hope I've answered your question satisfactorily, because I could really talk a long time.
With the current currency, just one more question. When this crash does happen, it's imminent. Not,
It's happening.
Yeah. Housing markets, is it going to plunder?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So your house might be worth less than what you paid for it.
100% true.
Okay.
Yeah. And believe me, I've made a lot of financial mistakes in my time, okay? I've never been bankrupt, and the bills have always been paid, so I'm blessed, right? But I've been underwater in a house on more than one occasion, and it hurts. Pay your bills. Keep paying them, because you signed a commitment for 30 years. You agreed to it. Honor the commitment. Pastor Karen, I think that everybody's been awake. You know, you're more awake now than you were in my banking history portion.
Yeah, we were awake. We were awake.
Yeah.
Well, thanks.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
So I just wanted to add a couple things. I know they said there's no announcements, but I wanted to piggyback off of what he was talking about. And just reiterate, we know the Bible speaks of a great wealth transfer. That wealth transfer is in the end days. We know we're in the end days. We know there's restructuring. The Lord's been speaking reset to us long before Joe said reset. So there is a godly reset going on. And that godly reset financially is for the church to become the leaders in the financial realm. So there are things, in the last 2 weeks, the Lord's really been impressing on me to just start researching it again, because we've invested in dinar, we've invested in Zion oil, we have investments, throughout gold and silver. But he's like saying, ramp it up. It's time to ramp it up. So he led me to a website, and I'm going to give you the name of this website to give you a very brief overview of the prophetic words that have been spoken. Now, the Lord had told us to follow Kim Clement several years ago. We knew who he was, but he just spoke to me and said, you need to follow Kim Clement. So when the Lord said through Kim Clement, invest in Ford, we invested in Ford. I was a little leery. We didn't do much, but we made a chunk of money because God said he was going to raise up Ford. So like John said, the Lord always does nothing without telling his prophets and apostles. He does nothing. We're going to know if we're listening for his voice. With that said, he led me to a website just randomly, and it was called The Great Wealth Transfer by TC, with TC, TC. And in that, he led me to one of his videos on YouTube that's called the 10 Greatest Wealth Transfer, the 10 Great Wealth Transfers, something like that. If you scroll down on his little thing, you'll see it. And he gives an awesome overview as to what the prophets have been saying to invest in. And one of the things that really spoke to me about this video was that, except for FirePoint E, I think that everything else is cumulative. I think we're supposed to invest to make more, to invest in the next thing to make more. I don't think it's going to be like this giant, all of a sudden we're wealthy. I think God's been setting us up to invest in certain things, take that money and invest in the next thing. Not saying that you can't make a lot of money on one thing, but God wants the money in the hands of the Christians. It's been in the hands of the evil one for a long time now, and he wants to set you up. So the other thing that really spoke clearly to me is I know a lot of people who like to be off the grid, and you kind of can't be off the grid. They know everything about you. They know what money you have. They know what money you don't have. You have to have a savings account. You have to be able to invest through E-Trade or Robinhood. Even if it's $30, you need to be able to invest in the things that God says to invest in. So if you're off the grid, I would dare say that you might get the benefits of God's provision, but you're not going to get the wealth transfer. So you need to be on the grid at some, are you in agreement? Hey, I really feel strongly this is the time. I think everybody needs to at least look at that website and just get an overview of the things the prophets have said that God was going to prosper. And the great wealth transfer with a small WTC. And apparently he's prophetic. I don't know anything about the guy, but I do know, and what prompted this was, okay, God, I know that Kim Clements prophesied a lot of different wealth transfers, but he's got so many prophecies. How do I find those? And it just like smacked me in the face. And there was a listing of things prophetically God said he was going to prosper. With that said, before I do another announcement, John, I know a lot of us are buying up gold and silver hard coin. John has found a company that actually transfers that to digital, and he's willing to introduce that to you if you're interested after service, or we can do it another time, whatever. But there's a way of being able to transfer your hard money into a digital dollar, your hard silver and gold to a digital dollar. It's some kind of digital wallet, and I don't understand it, but I do feel like this is something that we're going to need to be able to do at some point. Maybe not this year, but coming up, so it's good information. Did I get that right? Okay. Totally segue. Okay, so the feasts are upon us. We celebrate the feasts. Just a reminder, we have a Yom Kippur service on